Hello and welcome to Silux. And in today's 19th episode, we talked to Paul Braun, the digital curator at the National Museum of Natural History here in Luxembourg. And I'm very excited to present this episode to you because it's the first time we're actually talking to a researcher at the museum. I am a very big supporter of the museum. I often publish information about their different exhibitions and different activities, and I hope you will also get excited about what he talks about. He mentions a lot different activities when it comes to digitisation, but also talks about City Nature Challenge and the museum's work at iNaturalist. I hope you enjoy the interview. Hello and welcome to Silux. Our guest today is the digital curator of the National Museum of Natural History, Mr. Paul Braun. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Today we will be talking a lot about what the museum does and all the different initiatives, also looking at digitization of the whole thing. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you a simple but also kind of difficult question. What is biodiversity and why is it important?
Oh, yeah, that's a very difficult question. So it's biodiversity is a lot of things. It's the diversity of species, different taxa you can see out there, different animals, plants, fungi, algae, whatever you can think of that is living. But it's also the diversity maybe of habitats or biotopes. It can be there's also geodiversity, so the diversity of characteristics of the earth. So this is all very interconnected. So it's not very easy to describe what biodiversity is.
I know you're probably not happy I'm starting with such a difficult question from the beginning, but this is something that the museum really focuses on and talks a lot, and you also have exhibitions about it, and also some of the projects you're involved in are also about biodiversity. So I thought it would be good to start with that. Mm-hmm. So more or less we know what it is, the whole diversity of the species and habitats. But why do we always talk about the importance of it and that we're losing it and all that?
Well, it's part of the natural world, and as humans are also part of the natural world, we are very, let's say, intertwined with everything that's happening in the natural habitats, and we as humans have a very special place in this, as we are very strongly influencing everything. So we are constructing roads, we are mining things, we are polluting things, we are exploiting things. Or resources. So we are have very, very big influence on our natural environment. So, and of course, we are then influencing biodiversity. We are leading to definitely loss of species, which in return can have, they are part of a natural equilibrium that has established itself maybe over thousands or millions of years. And now very fast we are disturbing this. So then again, we might have repercussions for our own lives. There might be invasive species arriving in where the places we live, and they might be dangerous for humans. They might be pests for our crops. So that's just one small of the things that could happen. We change our environment and influence biodiversity. There might be loss of predators. There might be other species that will extend themselves and have bad influence on our environment.
Of course, it's actually, I think, a subject that we could just continue only focusing on that, right? I mean, if we start talking about invasive species and the opinions that people have, is it good? Is it bad? What should we do if they're already there, right? And how they influence the whole equilibrium and all that. But I was asking about this because I know you mentioned that the museum is the National Biodiversity Data Hub. What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. So we're this national hub. So we try to collect all the data or the observation data of species that we have that were made here in Luxembourg. So we have different sources, let's say, of this data. We have our scientists, of course, who do studies. They maybe study the distribution of a certain species or a certain group of species. And we try to have all this data together in our database and then publish it. Other sources could be, there's a big naturalist community. So people that are not professionally working with biodiversity data, but maybe do it as their hobby, which are they might be very advanced. So there's a lot of this community going on, people that specialize in certain groups and look for them, collect data on it, and document with specimens. Nowadays, we also have the community science or citizen science aspect. So people, everyday people, let's say, that do contribute their observations of what they see outside. So we have tools now that people can use to record the occurrence of species quite easily and share it with everyone.
This is actually yet another result of using smartphones, right? Because that's kind of developed and made it faster for people to make observations as well. And just, with the possibility to geolocalize and take a picture to prove and everything else. But before we go on to this whole idea of citizen science and observations and all that, I know you prepared a question, pub quiz question for our listeners that is a little bit related to that.
So the question is to name the 4 most important elements when recording biodiversity observation or occurrence. And maybe there's also a bonus one that you can add to those 4 main things.
Okay, thank you very much. For the bonus point, do you provide any prizes from the museum, like a free entry? I don't know if you have that power.
No, it's
to
not
do that.
Not planned. Yeah.
But yes, bonus points. You get double congratulations if you know that, right?
Of course.
Or something like that. I'll think about something. Okay, but coming back, so you mentioned citizen science, community science, and all that. So one of the important applications and movements, I would even say, that the museum is using, the tool that you're using and also promoting, is iNaturalist. What is that exactly?
So iNaturalist is something like, you could call it a social network all around sharing and recording biodiversity observations. So it's a platform. It started in 2008, I think. And it's the California Academy of Sciences and the National Geographic Society is nowadays supporting this platform. So on one side, it's a website, and there's an application for smartphone. So you can use it on these two, with those 2 tools. And the main idea is to record occurrences of wild biodiversity, which is always important to say, that we are talking about wild species. We're not talking about maybe salads in the garden or tulips.
And that's a problem, because not everybody seems to understand that. I was recently checking the website, and I could see that people were just taking pictures of their garden plants or something like that. Why is that? Why do people do this?
It's sometimes very difficult to, well, maybe for those that start first, they want to have a quick feedback, and they record something that they see very in their proximity. So it is allowed to, of course, do this. And iNaturalist even has a flag, so we can tick it, and then we can say this is a captive or cultivated plant or animal. But there's also sometimes it's also not so easy to distinguish between what is now a really wild species or wild occurrence of a species, or what is put there by humans. So if we talk about parks, it's sometimes not very visible what is now. Maybe it is a local occurring species, but it has been planted there or moved there. So it's sometimes even very difficult to really see if this is now part of the wild or part of maybe something that humans put there.
Of course. I mean, with parks, I think this is a very good example, right? Because I would not expect myself to take a picture of a tree, let's say, in a park, because that's not going to be wild, unless we can trace it back to the times when before the park was created, and maybe that one tree was the reason that somebody decided to have the park in the first place. But most probably it's just created by humans, right?
Yeah.
But if we go to the forest, then I would expect that most of it is wild, although not really, right?
Yeah, I mean, forests are one of the most, also part of our cultivated landscape, especially here in Luxembourg. So you would have to go to rainforest or somewhere to really see a forest that is all natural. But then again, we have insects living there. We have other plants growing there, which might not be the trees that are planted. So the diversity is much more than just the trees in a forest. There's tons of insects living in every corner, or even on cultivated fields. We also have wild species growing there. Less and less, but we can still find them. And yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned that iNaturalist, the way it works is that somebody publishes some observation and then it gets validated by the others, right?
Yeah.
It's not that you kind of how does it work from a scientific standpoint, let's say, because that's always a problem, this cooperation between citizens and scientists. First of all, in the past especially, I guess the idea was like, we the scientists decide, we know, we observe, we know we have all the tools, necessary tools, but now you start cooperating, right? So what has to happen for you to actually treat it as a source of data for your biodiversity studies?
Yeah, so maybe I can even start with what the user is doing. That might be even more
Yes.
interesting for the listeners. So basically, you start by joining the network. So it's downloading the app or joining the website and creating an account. And then you basically can start observing things. So first you have to be out there and look for wild things or semi-wild things, or what you think is interesting to observe. And then the app works by just taking a picture. So you can just go out around with your smartphone or your camera and take pictures, or you can open the app and already take a picture within the app. And smartphones are quite useful because they have a GPS, so it can already record where you saw it and when you saw it also, that it's quite automatically. Or if you have done pictures before it, sometimes smartphones, they record the GPS in your pictures. So this is all taken care of usually. And so you create this observation where you already know when and where it was seen. And then the app guides you through it by having a field on what did you see. And if you click on it, the app will analyze the image, and iNaturalist has an image recognition algorithm running in the background. So at the start of the platform, they did not have this algorithm, but they had observations which were determined by experts. And so they trained this model. And so nowadays they offer the app where this model is applied, and the app basically takes your picture and gives you some suggestions of what it might be that you saw. And so you get a list and you choose whatever seems most convenient for you. But if you're a specialist and already know what it is, you can type it in, and it has a big database behind it with all species name, scientific species name, also with common names, of course, in different languages. So you choose this, and basically you recorded the things that are important for you and you upload it. And then it's available for the other users on the platform. So you created your observation with an indication of what you saw. This can be a species, but it can also be, I don't know, it's just a plant. I just enter plant, or I just enter a bird. And then I hope for other specialists or other users to come and check my observation. And so they have the possibility to add their own identification. So they just click add identification, and they enter the species they think it is, or they validate if I already took the right one. They validate what I saw. And so it goes through a validation process where 2/3 of let's say the identifiers need to be or need to have the same opinion on what it is. And then the observation gets this research grade. So that's iNaturalist uses this term research grade as the observations which are validated by 2/3 or 2/3 of the validations are of the same opinion.
And it's valid for everybody. So if you're a scientist and you are using iNaturalist, you also need to have this validation from others.
Yeah, so iNaturalist works on the community base. So there's no distinction between users. So basically every user has the same power, but scientists or specialists are more encouraged to do identification. So usually the normal user that starts using the app is not encouraged to go and validate observations by others, as we suppose that these new users are usually the ones that do observations and that want to learn something and are not the experts that already know how to validate the species.
From the computer science point of view, I think this is brilliant because this is already feeding the model straight away, right? If you get let's say Okay, because it depends. You can also just write plant and then somebody is identifying. But if you're using that built-in image recognition, and then you choose something, and then you get the validation from specialists, this is the best way to actually develop the model so that it will recognize the species in a better and more efficient way.
Yeah, sure. So iNaturalist, they take the, let's say, a set of species where they have enough images from time to time. I think once a year or every 2 years, they take all those images with the linked species name, and then they feed it into their model, which is then training for weeks or months to develop a new model, which can then be used to, or is then published again and is then used by the users to do identifications. And nowadays they also include geographic distribution of the species. So a few years ago, it was still sometimes a bit shaky, where you got suggestions of species that only occur, for example, in South America here in Europe. So nowadays it's more refined, and it can better suggest things that have already been seen in the area. So it's getting better and better with time. But then again, there are also limits. So with certain species, you can't even an expert can't clearly identify them just with images. Talking about insects, where they need to basically dissect them under the microscope to exactly define this species and not that species. But then again, I personally think it's still useful to have those records in iNaturalist, for example, even if they're just determined, for example, to genus level. It's still, for me, it's still interesting data to see, okay, this occurs in Luxembourg, even if we don't know exactly the species. So unfortunately, those do not get this research grade, as it's mostly just species that get research grade. But the data is still available on the platform, and it's available to everyone. So it's not that it's lost.
Of course, it's always some kind of a trace, maybe not as strong
Yeah.
as you said when you dissect something, but still. Okay. And then also there is the Luxembourg part of iNaturalist, right? So you are responsible for running this project. How does it
Hmm.
work? And is it, in which language is it as well? Because of course we are in Luxembourg. I have
Yeah.
to ask that question.
So maybe it's important to tell that a few years ago, iNaturalist, so it started in the United States, and they were starting to look for additional partners. They saw, okay, this platform is getting used globally. There's millions of people starting to use it, and there's millions of records. I think now we are at 90 million records, if I'm not wrong, on the platform from all over the world. And so they started to look for, let's say, national partners in different countries. So they started a program where institutions, science institution or biodiversity institution in the country could apply basically to become a network partner of this global network. And I think nowadays we are at 20 partners. So Luxembourg, or we as the museum, joined this network last year for Luxembourg. The platform itself is still the same. So it's everything is in the same database, the same tool is used, the same app is used, the same algorithm is used. But we have our, let's say, our own access portal where we do personalize a few things. So it's iNaturalist LU, not the .org site, but it's still the same database. So if I share something, someone in Australia will see it. If someone in Australia shares it, we will see it.
What did you personalize?
It's basically just, it's the logo. There's some text on there, and we can add messages to the community. Okay, here there's an interesting project going on, so people on the site would see it. And we do take a bit of a responsibility for the community in Luxembourg. We try to organize events, try to be sort of a help desk, or just take a look at the observations that are made, maybe guide people if we see errors or people not using it in the correct way. Stuff like this we do. And as a partner, we do also get access to the exact locations of some occurrences which are hidden to the general public. So it's something we didn't talk about, but there is the possibility to define species which are threatened, for example, in an area. And if someone shares an observation of this, not all of the public will see it, because the idea is to not disturb this occurrence of this species. If it's a nest of a rare bird, we do not want to publish this exactly, because the fear is that tons of people will visit it to take pictures, and then it basically will run or fly away, in this case, stuff like this. So we, as the partner institution, would have access to this if, for example, for study or for conservation purposes, we would need this information. But still, at the moment, there's not that much of this data in Luxembourg. In other countries, this is more of an issue. When talking about tropical forests, where poaching, for example, is an issue, it's more important to have these restrictions.
And what about the wolves? Will they also put on iNaturalist or not?
If someone sees it and uses iNaturalist, they can put it on there. But so iNaturalist is strictly on a personal level. So every user is there for himself. So it's not an institution that uploads bulk observations, for example. This is done maybe through our database. If it's a study or something like this, it should end up in our database.
What about promoting iNaturalist at schools? Do you do that as well? Do you try to involve the students? I'm asking because I've heard recently, I have a friend who has a son at one of the Luxembourgish schools, and it was his homework to go and look for some plants, which I find really cool as an idea.
Yeah, so we started doing this a bit in the last year, exploring what we could do, and we have now certain teacher groups who on themselves start using it. So there's this organization ABIOL, which is the Biology Teacher Association of lycées in Luxembourg, and they have currently, it might be this whatever this kid is doing. So they have a project which they call Hello Spring, where they start looking for plants and animals which do occur in spring or are indicative species of spring. So they have workshops with their kids where they go out and ask them to record certain species. But we try not to have too much of schools, because we do also unfortunately see some abuse sometimes of iNaturalist by school kids, which start validating each other's observations, or they do take pictures that are not theirs, stuff like this. We unfortunately also see, especially with school kids, unfortunately. But in general, I think it's still interesting to involve them, but it takes some time also maybe for the teachers to get to learn about the tool and how it works, and also guide their students.
Of course, the teachers have also to be, into that kind of citizen science and in general using technologies, which is not always the case, depends on the teacher. Okay, so you talked about abuse. So, I wouldn't be a proper journalist if I didn't ask that question. What are the disadvantages of using iNaturalist? Because you kind of avoided that question in the beginning. You started talking, okay, this is how we use it and whatever. But there's always that problem that these tools are great to a certain extent, but there are also some disadvantages of using it.
Yeah, so there are. I'm not sure if we would call it disadvantages. So let's call it limits to what iNaturalist can do. So it's not inherently. There's no inherently bad thing. But there are some limitations, like the system that users can validate each other. If they start abusing it, then we would have a problem. But then again, we have the community. It's 2/3. So if we see this, then there's always other users which can work against it. But it's sometimes frustrating for the specialists or the power users, if they see those things, that just kids starting or people starting to upload not their own images. This would be a limitation, where it's quite dangerous also to create false data maybe. And if it's not, a lot of it is recognized, but there's always things that fall through the cracks. There's also sometimes some issues with the quality of data. So people, okay, they have the GPS, but if you start using the app, the GPS is not warmed up, let's say, and it gives wrong coordinates with very high precision. If this precision is 10 kilometers, we can't really use, or the accuracy, we can't really use this for too much. So, and of course, there's a lot of observations of very common species that are, of course, uploaded, or those species that are like daffodils. That's the example, daffodils. So that's a plant that does occur naturally in Luxembourg, but only in a few spots. But of course, everybody knows it because it grows in parks and grows everywhere, basically. And so now we have a lot of those observations, but they do, of course, not represent natural distribution or the natural populations of this species. So those are things that are sometimes a bit difficult. Or other cultivated plants that are not marked as cultivated, so it's hard to distinguish those.
Of course, but in general, we have to say that it's a positive thing, right? Not to finish on this pessimistic note that there are so many problems. It's just really having more observations, more people participating, also detecting invasive species, right?
Yeah.
This is good as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so the general idea is that with all those thousands of observers, we have much more eyes out there than just a few scientists who are looking just for specific things in specific areas. So the idea is that we might be able to detect certain invasive species earlier with this system, or the distribution of those species. Maybe we can also distinguish between this invasive species is always a term that it's a negative impact, but there's also the general term about neobiota. So that's just new species that we have in Luxembourg. So some of them, they're also present, but they don't really influence anything. So they are there, but there is no need for action or something. But with other species, there is a need for action also on the government level, that they need to go there and, in worst case, remove them because they might pose a danger to the ecosystem, but also to population.
If you take the data from iNaturalist, it has to be first validated before you start actually using any government actions for that, or not? Or can you act upon iNaturalist data?
I guess the specialists can detect it, and then they might go again to the site and validate for themselves to be sure. So there's no automatic system that when something is detected and an alarm or someone just takes an action without confirming it or without going there. So there's still a process behind it. But we do also put into place like an alert system or email system where if certain species are detected on iNaturalist, it goes out to a specialist group, which then go on iNaturalist. They might validate it there or say, no, it's not that, or they might go into the field and check if something is going on with those species.
It sounds good, very nice. I already kind of in my imagination have these, special corps of scientists going to detect and collect and check and whatever. But on that level, I don't know why, don't ask me. I just thought about the BioBlitz, maybe because it's just, action and something fast and whatever. And I wanted to talk about this as well with you. So one of the things that you also do is the City Nature Challenge.
Yes.
And this whole idea of a global BioBlitz. Can you tell us more about that?
So the BioBlitz is the idea of defining maybe an area and a time frame. This can be a day or several days or just a few hours, or it can be a very specific site, a park, or it can be an entire country. In the case that City Nature Challenge is for us, and then motivate people.
And that's the entire country, right?
For the City Nature Challenge, yes.
It is, because I was wondering if it's city, whether it's only Luxembourg City or is the whole country.
No, for us, we are participating as the whole country. So the idea is of a BioBlitz to have this defined time and area and then meet there and start recording whatever we can find. And this can be scientists, they can do a BioBlitz, but the idea in general is to involve the general public. And iNaturalist is, of course, a very simple tool to do this. You can define your criteria on the site even, and then automatically put all the observations that people share in there. And so the City Nature Challenge takes this idea of a BioBlitz, but does it on a global scale. So it's looking for partners throughout the world which organize in their area this BioBlitz on the same date as all the others do. So this year it's the 29th of April.
And it finishes on the 3rd, is it? 3rd of May?
So it's basically two parts. The first part finishes on the 2nd, so on Monday. And that's the first part is the part where people can record their observations. And then the second part lasts another week. It's basically the idea if people just took pictures and they want to have time to upload everything to the site, but also the specialists and the users to identify as much as they can on the site. So there's another week for this. And then we basically on Monday published the results. So on a global level. So I think this year we have nearly 400 regions that participate. So there are results being published then. And then we as the museum, we started to participate in this challenge 4 years ago. So this will be our fourth edition. In the first edition, it was really a city nature challenge for us. So we said, okay, it's just in the commune of Luxembourg. But then we had COVID crisis for the second year, and it was really in the peak, let's say, or in the beginning, and we didn't want to have people needing to travel. So the recommendations were really stay at home back then. So we said, okay, we are a small country, so let's say stay wherever you are in the country and participate from there. And we kept this for this year also, for the last year also. And if you look at other participants, it's mainly the basis are cities, but then we have cities which have a huge national park included in the US, which are X times larger than Luxembourg is. And so we checked with them, and for them it's also okay. And I think Luxembourg is quite densely populated, and
so we are officially not cheating.
Yes.
Let's say, right?
Exactly.
We got the acceptance, the stamped and approved part.
So the original focus of the challenge is, okay, urban biodiversity, but it's not a problem if you go somewhere and also record things not in urban setting.
And what do you observe when it comes to the number of participants in iNaturalist and in general the observations? What kind of percentages of increase do you see because of that City Nature Challenge? Is it really like loads of people just participate for those few days, and then the iNaturalist again is just used by the normal users, or do you really observe a big difference?
Yeah, so if we look at the numbers on the global scale of iNaturalist, we do see a very, very high peak during the City Nature Challenge. So it's really the event using iNaturalist in the world. So it's maybe 4 or 5 times more than, or even much more than on a normal
Luxembourg,
weekend.
Can we talk about the difference, or is it just because it's quite a new thing that you don't observe that much of a difference yet?
No, we also see a very, very large peak for the City Nature Challenge.
Well, once again, I want to remind, so nobody forgets, on this year, because everybody is going to listen to this episode, and then everybody in Luxembourg will participate. So we said from the 29th of April until the 2nd of May. Yes, and then also a week more just to comment, to observe, to identify, and so on and so forth.
And participation is quite easy. So you just need to use iNaturalist in that time period and do your observations here in Luxembourg, and everything will be automatically uploaded or added to our project, which is our contribution to the City Nature Challenge. So there's no need to register something extra with a project on iNaturalist or something.
And you also don't need to go anywhere, right? Because when you said like we meet somewhere, it's not that everybody has to have a starting point where, because I kind of, imagined Pokemon Go people kind of, like with the phones, but if it's in the same place, there's not going to be that many observations, right? So most probably it's just wherever you are, you wake up in the morning and you observe the whole day. All the days.
You don't have to do it all day long, but if you take a few minutes, or there's wild biodiversity a bit everywhere. So take a look in your garden, or even in a basement, or so there's some spiders running around. Or if you go on a walk anyway during the weekend, I'm quite sure you'll find quite a lot of stuff. And if you start looking, you will find more and more different things usually.
Do you personally have every year some special place you go to? Probably you will not reveal because then others might go. So I assume you participate, right? Don't say no because that's not a good promotion. And then what do you do? Do you try to go to a place you haven't visited yet to try to find something new, or what's your approach?
Yeah, it's a mix. So I do maybe walk the same or take a longer walk to work in the morning or in the afternoon, take a small detour maybe through, I mean, in Luxembourg City, it's quite easy to not pass the main streets and go through a small forest or a park and just take a look what's happening there. And you can also visit, or I've also visited like a nature reserve is somewhere, or just go into a forest near you and just take a look there.
Just not daffodils, as we already said.
Yeah, not too many at
Maybe
least.
they will not be there anymore. I remember I went last year to the famous daffodil place, and they were already kind of, on the verge of dying out. So yes, it's very, very short time frame. And I think the City Nature Challenge is a little bit later than normally you can observe them. So.
Well, in the end, for Luxembourg, it's the City Nature Challenge is quite early, let's say, for the main periods of biodiversity. But we do see it as a good motivation for people to start the season, let's say, and get familiar with iNaturalist and maybe keep using it for the rest of the year and for the next year. So we do see from year to year more and more users also sticking with it afterwards. But in general, the trend is most of them just use it maybe for the weekend, or a lot of new users for the weekend, and then some of them stay. But the general trend is that we have more and more users coming to iNaturalist in Luxembourg and also contributing observations.
I would also assume that during COVID times, maybe there were more observations because we all started walking more and going more to the nature, or not? Did you see a difference or not?
Honestly, it's quite difficult to see if this is really the case, because we had a growth anyway from year to year. So it's difficult to say if this is COVID related or not. But the
most important thing is that it stays and it's more. Let's keep it there, not talk about the numbers. Okay, so we discussed a lot about iNaturalist and the City Nature Challenge, but I know that you do also other things at the museum, and I would really like to at least touch upon. Maybe there'll be an occasion to talk again, so you can tell us a little bit more on that other side, right? Behind the scenes, not so much, because actually, for example, on Twitter, you can see sometimes what you're doing behind the scenes when it comes to digitization. So this is also another thing you are responsible for. As I said, you're the digital curator of the museum. And what you do, you manage the national natural heritage collections and you make them available to the public. How does it work? What do you mean with available, and what is digitization in your case?
So the museum is in a unique position that we are the main institution that has collections on natural heritage, let's say, or natural history heritage for Luxembourg. So we have different departments: zoology, botany, geology, or paleontology, mineralogy, and they all have their collections. So they collect specimens in Luxembourg, or they collect specimens that others have, or we keep them that other people collected. So this is really quite a special task, because we are basically preserving vouchers of biodiversity or natural heritage that occurred here in Luxembourg. So we have talked a lot about observation data. It's good to have observation data with pictures nowadays more and more. But in the end, what is the most important for scientists is always a voucher, let's say a physical specimen of this plant that occurred in Luxembourg at that point. So that's irrefutable proof, let's say, that it really was here. And it also can be used for further study. Like we can do DNA analysis on some of them. We can measure traits, stuff like this. And so the museum has those collections, and this is inherent part of the museum, is to manage these collections. And they are usually in the background. So we have some pieces in the exhibition, and we try to illustrate a bit the importance in the exhibition. But then we have large depots where we have 100,000 herbarium specimens, so dried plants. We have tens of thousands of fossils or minerals that we store. We have thousands of bird specimens, and we have the largest collections are the invertebrate ones, so insects and other invertebrate species, where we honestly are not very sure how many individuals we have, because they are quite small. They are specimens which are just tubes with alcohol and 100 individuals of a certain insect which were studied or collected for a certain species. And so the idea is to make these collections are inherently open to the public, open to scientists and who want to study them. But with digitization, we have a unique opportunity to make them available to even more or even easier to everyone. So the idea of digitization is to create a digital record of every specimen that we have in the end, which will take for some collections quite some time. But that's the main idea, to show what we have and to make it available and to provide access to scientists. So digitization as a start, it can be just an entry into a database. Okay, we have a specimen, it has a number and it's somewhere and it's this species. But then we can improve on digitization by maybe adding a picture. We can improve on adding coordinates. Where was this collected? Who collected it? When was it collected? So we can enrich all these records more and more. So we can add images, which is easy for some parts. So for the herbarium, we did more than 60,000 images already, many of which are available. And for the herbarium of plants, scientists can already do a lot with high resolution images. So they are accessible and they can take a look at it, redetermine it if necessary, or evaluate. But of course, for tiny insects, it's much more difficult to do good images, and there's also so many of them. For other specimens, we could even do 3D models. We had a small project for fossils we have, which are decomposing after time. So we thought, okay, let's do a project. Let's create 3D models of these and make them available, or have at least documentation of these specimens, which we know will decompose in a certain amount of years.
So for the high resolution images or for the 3D models, do you have resources in-house? Do you have people who are able to do that, or do you need to cooperate with some outside consultants?
For the moment, we do need to call on outside help. So for this herbarium project, we managed to get funding to send basically nearly all our specimens to the Netherlands, where there is a company that specializes in digitization of all kinds of things, but they have developed a special machine or a conveyor belt system to digitize as many herbarium specimens as possible within a day. I think there are.
Did you see it yourself? Did
Yes.
you go to see it?
Yes. So we packed everything, and then I also went there to see it. It's quite impressive. It's I'd say a big black box in the middle with a camera and a big flash, and then a conveyor belt system where one person takes the specimen, lays it on one side of the conveyor belt, it goes into the machine and comes out on the other side, and it's basically repacked within less than a minute, which also helps to prevent any damage to the specimens. So we were lucky that we managed to secure this funding for this collection. But for other collections, we have not really started. For pin specimens or insects, for example, we haven't started this mass digitization efforts. So we are at the moment focusing on just recording that we have the specimens where they are in a collection, adding a number maybe. And then so later on, we can enrich this. And there's actually the same company has developed this conveyor belt system also for insects. So in the future, there might be possibility to do something like this from the outside. But then again, we also have equipment in the museum to do microscopic images, to do like overview images, or to do like small 3D models using photogrammetry, for example, which is quite an easy approach. So we are also trying to reinforce our capabilities at the museum. But then again, we are faced with millions of specimens in some collections, which will take a lot of time and effort in the future. So there's still a lot of work to do, just imaging the specimens, and then there's data transcription, knowing what it is, where it was found, who found it, when. Well,
you need a lot of motivation, because I just imagine yourself coming to the museum every day and thinking like, where's the light at the end of the tunnel? Like,
sometimes it's the case, yeah. But then it's also very gratifying, I guess, when you manage to have a data set, clean it, figure out historic people maybe who collected it 100 years ago somewhere, find an old village that maybe doesn't exist anymore, and have all this data enriched and publish it and see that it's out there for people to see. And then
Of
again,
course. And where do you publish it?
so currently we have our own small data portal for Luxembourg, which is focused on the part which is more occurrence data. So for specialists who want to study distribution, so that's that portal. And we also publish to something called GBIF. So it's the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which is a global network with the aim to have a portal where all the biodiversity data from all of the world that institutions have are published together. So they develop standards, things can be uploaded there, and then it will be shown on the map. They match it to a taxonomy for people to be able to search for what they are looking for. They also display the images up there. So that's one of the main places we publish currently. And we're trying to establish also something like this on a local or national portal to have our collections a bit displayed in a better way, but it's work in progress and we might need some more time to do this.
And that plan would mean open data for just for the scientific community or for just
Well, usually
anybody?
open data is, if it's open data, it's open to everyone. It might just be that it's more accessible or scientists will understand it or will use it in a better way than others might do it. So everything that we publish to GB, for example, is open. So it's on a CC0 license, the occurrence records. So anyone can do whatever they want with it afterwards, use it for their publications, use it for commercial use. And pictures we do also usually publish under CC BY, so people can reuse it, but they just have to cite that it comes from the museum, and for the rest it's open. We also see in this community that the community around Wikipedia, Wikicommons, they reuse those images also from iNaturalist. If they're published openly, they reuse it for Wikipedia articles on species to help the general public ID them. So that's quite an interesting development that we see, that also reuse of data. And for example, GBIF has a very good system in place when people download data, not pictures, but records, and use it in their study or their publication. They can track this. So we, again, as publishers, we at some point can see this study has used our records. So it gives us a feedback also. Okay, it's used, that with what we publish is used by others.
That is great, and that's very also motivating. I know from my own personal experiences that if I get the right tag at the right moment, that's very exciting, because then I can trace back what was happening with the discussion, with the picture or whatever else, right? So it's also motivating for later, and at least you just don't have the feeling that you're putting it out in the void, and you don't know, because sometimes it might be just really interesting studies that are based on your work. So it's always good to know. Okay, as usual, I have this problem with this podcast is that whenever I plan certain amount of time, then I have so many questions and so many things that suddenly I'm like, okay, we need to finish and we haven't even solved the question. So first of all, let's focus on the question, and then maybe we'll squeeze one or two more things. We'll see how it goes. Can you please remind our listeners what the question was, and then of course reveal the answer?
So the question was, what are the 4 main elements that you need to record when you want to record a biodiversity observation? So the answer is, what did you see? So a name of a species, for example. Where did you see it? So the coordinates of where you saw it. When did you see it? So a date, which is important if it's seen in the winter or in spring. And who are you? So it's also important for us to at least be able to trace back to origin of who it was. For scientists, it's of course a thing of recognition. If he has his name there, then we can track what he uses. Or if we have more questions, we can contact someone through iNaturalist, for example.
Of course. And then there was the bonus.
Yes.
I'm waiting for the bonus. What's the bonus?
So the bonus is proof. So for iNaturalist, it's, for example, a picture of what you saw. It can also be an audio recording of a bird. If you talk about collections, it's of course the specimen is the proof of what was seen somewhere or observed somewhere.
Oh, this is interesting. You mentioned the audio recordings. Does iNaturalist also allow you to upload sound or not?
Yes, so it allows to upload it, but it doesn't have an algorithm to do it. There are other platforms or tools that do work a similar way with as iNaturalist does with the images, and does the same with sound. I personally sometimes use the other app to just record it and get the suggestion of what it is, and then I upload it to iNaturalist with that suggestion, and I hope for someone to validate it.
It makes me feel better because one of my ambitious plans has always been to understand which bird I'm hearing, and it's never happened. So if you're saying that you're using an app actually to help you out, that makes me feel better because it's always, you go to school and they teach you sometimes or not or whatever, and then you just really just the same with plants and trees and everything, which iNaturalist can help
Yeah.
you with, right? Because then you don't feel so ignorant anymore if it helps you out with
Yeah,
identifying
of course.
things.
The iNaturalist is quite useful because for people also to name things. So it's often people ask, "Oh, what is this? You're the expert. Can you please tell me what this is or what is it called?" So iNaturalist is quite useful for this. It not only gives you the Latin name or the scientific name, but it has a big database about common names in all types of languages. And even the community can add new names to it. So it's also iNaturalist really lives by the community who are contributing things.
You came back to the languages, so I wanted to
Yes.
ask you, how is it with Luxembourgish names of species? Are you actually curating that as well to have this database? Because you said there is a database, so people can actually find it. How does it work? Is it really a big one, or are you developing that still?
So on iNaturalist, there are some common names in Luxembourgish. We uploaded, for example, the bird names because there was work. Someone basically took the time to define or publish a list. Okay, these are the Luxembourgish names that we agreed on for these species. Because I remember there is an older work which just collated all the names that someone used at some point, but it's not really let's say agreed upon list of Luxembourgish names. So that's the main difficulty to get all the names together. And I know a colleague of mine at the museum, he's actually working on a list with some partners, a list of common Luxembourgish plant names to define, if it's not there, a logical name for all of these plants in Luxembourg. So as soon as this is maybe published, we can add this to iNaturalist, and then you can search for them or you get the info when you're on the site.
That's great. Very, very useful as well for our Luxembourgish knowledge and just, also another way of actually developing these lists that are probably somewhere in people's minds, but not necessarily easily available like that. So the language side is there as well. Okay, unfortunately, as usual, we have to finish with this. I think we have to meet once again. Huh? This was not enough because we haven't talked that much about the behind the scenes work, right? And all this, because you told me about the some of the digitization, but we haven't really talked about the transcription of data and so other projects you participate in. But I'm sure the next time we meet, there'll be new ones, so we can again talk about it. But today I wanted to focus also on City Nature Challenge because it's soon. So it's a good way to appeal and remind people to participate. And well, you should be doing less, so we would have less things to talk about for
But
sure.
I would be happy to talk to you about digitization and all of the things that are behind it and what it's used for some other time.
Yeah, for sure. We have to do that as well. Another session on that and another appeal. Do go to the museum. It's an amazing place. If you're a child, you can also go down the slide, but not only, you can also enjoy other things. It's really, really nice. And there's also a new exhibition, temporary exhibition coming soon. So in case you've seen Lost Ocean like 3 times, like me, just you can go see something else very soon. Thank you very much. Today, our guest was Paul Braun, the digital curator at the National Museum of Natural History.
Thank you for having me.
And this is it for today. Unfortunately, as usual, I'm always unhappy to finish the podcast and not to be able to talk longer, but I guess 1 hour or around 1 hour is already enough. Please don't forget to subscribe, to follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Write me, suggest any type of subjects, people I should talk to, or anything else you just want to share with me. This was Silax, and my name is Hanna Siemaszko.